Okay, this is another episode of Thorin's Platform, and my guest for this one is WallabeeBeatle, who you might have seen in the past on an episode of Counterpoints. And we're going to be talking in this particular one about a piece he wrote about the North in-game leader MSL, who obviously has been in the different organizations that that team has represented for a long time, and I would say is kind of, he's one of those people for me as an in-game leader who kind of bridges the gap between famous and infamous. Yeah. Because it seems like half the people, I mean, obviously I can't know the exact ratio, but just for the sake of the premise, you know, half the people think good in-game leader has developed all this talent, you know, sort of plucky up-and-comer, still trying to make it. And then half the people are sort of like, yeah, but look at these flaws, and, you know, the flaws sort of overwhelm the bigger picture for them. And it is real tough, I have to say, with people like this, to get a really reasonable kind of balanced view on them. And when I say balanced, I don't mean that you have to have good and bad. I just mean to kind of take it all in at once and let it inform you. Because I have to say, I do think in some senses with some of the really great in-game leaders, sometimes we're actually unfair in that we only talk about how great they are. And like, it's very rare you'll ever see anyone do a video where they actually point out Fallen's weaknesses. And for anyone who has an SK Flower on Reddit watching this now, if you imagine Fallen doesn't have any weaknesses, then I would just say you probably don't know the game enough, you know. Everyone has weaknesses at this point. So let's start off, okay. The big premise of this piece kind of was what I just outlined there. It's the idea that if you actually try to take in as many factors as you can and weigh up the good and the bad, it almost seems like North, well, funnily enough, North itself and MSL as an in-game leader, it's like every strength they have also somehow is their weakness. And it seems like they're connected in some kind of intrinsic way, right? So what was the inspiration for why you wanted to write this piece?
I actually haven't done any content on North before, so it was, I don't know, it's just sort of been, it was just sort of inevitable that I wrote a piece. And yeah, like you were saying, MSL is just sort of like a very confusing, he's like an enigmatic figure, you know, he's very confusing to think about because he has these strengths, but they also come back, you know, like in CT side versus T side, or developing talent, keeping talent, or keeping people at their peak. You know, you see people like Pimp and Magic's fall off under his reign. So he's a character. And then the title I got from is some weird, I got it from reading a book like The Gods Themselves by Asimov. It was some like, I don't know. There's like this weird physics thing, and I thought of he mentioned like water running up and down a hill, and I thought that sort of reminded me of MSL.
Okay, so then let's dive into one of these topics then. So one of the things that is, I mean, this is always so tough to gauge generally anyway, because a lot of in-game leaders actually, like, first of all, some of them just get the talent that they have in their team and maybe they stick with them forever. So it's hard to always know, you know, did the player improve because he was under him, or is it just because the in-game leader looked better because he had a good player? It's always tough. But in a weird way, I mean, the fact that MSL gets all his star players stolen, at least until this point, like so far, it hasn't happened yet to Config, but personally, I secretly suspect it will happen one day. You know, that's one of those things where even when people say, yeah, but North has an amazing investment and really long contracts, like, listen, if you follow Counter-Strike, you know that by hook or by crook, there's a reason why the best players end up with the other best players. It just someone finds a way, you know. So what would you say to that topic? Because it does seem like, in a weird way, it's obviously a setback to have your star players stolen, but the fact that then he kind of has to, well, either create new star players or fail and go to a lower level is also one of the key elements that I think a lot of people do kind of praise him for, right? That he somehow does develop these star talents.
Yeah, if I was to talk about like parallelisms in the piece, like the one that I thought was sort of unequivocal was, well, there's two that are really unequivocal. One is like you have to have sympathy for him because of the, because he just keeps getting his star players stolen. The other one was at the end, talking about the map, who I thought there's really not a good justification for his pick and ban phase. But yeah, I think, like you were saying, it's definitely that's the point where you have to be most sympathetic, because he's. I remember this discussion was coming up a lot about a year ago when Astralis was really bad. Bad per their prestige or whatever. But but I assume that Config's gonna go eventually. If Astralis doesn't win another title in the next 6 months, I think it's gonna be increasingly a discussion point.
Okay. And another thing you pointed out, which I think is actually, funnily enough, I don't think I've ever seen anyone else point this out, because I often do, whenever I describe MSL's T-style, I explain like the dual entry system, which he especially has emphasized. Like it's been like that's generally how a lot of great in-game leaders, especially the tactical ones, did it anyway. But I noticed that he specifically, it's almost like that's his blueprint, you know, and you even see that he almost like, that's part of how he crafts the stars. Its star player is nearly always the person who's the entry player with him, who is the follow-up guy, and he sets them up. Like that's kind of how he builds these guys up, which in itself is kind of interesting, because you consider a lot of teams, they might use entry systems like this, but they don't necessarily use the star player always like that, you know.
Yeah, I think especially right now it's super effective for North, because config's really in a good spot right now. And yeah, if you go back historically, like I saw your Reflections interview with MSL, and he was saying like AZ used to be really strong where when he was that entry system. So I thought, yeah, that ties into it somewhat. It doesn't work for everyone. It really didn't affect Magic's as much because he wasn't an entry player, but I think, yeah, I definitely think that's a component of why some players like Kirby as well rose up during his system. And I think, yeah, right now with config being so strong and he being set up by MSL so frequently, that also adds to North's success on the T side in addition to the tactics.
Yes. The funny thing is, when you mentioned the map pick ban, right, that is always, I'm amazed actually that fans don't pick up on that more. Like, it's one of those ones where even when I've actually said it, it's actually not one of those things that's caught on. People don't tend to, like, there isn't okay, it actually became a meme because I just mentioned so many times on analyst desk, oh, exist, look at these pick bans, like, how the fuck do you get the, you know, people took the meme and ran with it. But bizarrely, there isn't actually that much of like an MSL pick ban mythos, you know. I don't know if that's because people underrate North and don't think that good, because funnily enough, when you mentioned in this article, this was when you actually mentioned specifically Mirage, this is a perfect example of what's so bizarre about his pick ban, right? Is that even when you made the point, okay, which is correct, that actually the win rate on that map isn't that crazy. Like it said here that the win rate was 5 wins, a draw, and 4 losses since the player break on Mirage. So basically, like, you know, 1 game over 50%, like even record, which, you know, if that's going to be one of your top 2 maps, you might think to yourself, well, that's unacceptable. You know, this obviously just isn't a good team and they don't have a good map pool. But here's the bizarre thing. Even within that sentence at the end, when it says without a win against Astralis, G2, SK and FaZe, right? Well, SK and FaZe are arguably the 2 best teams on the map. Astralis has always been decent, and actually G2 bizarrely have this ridiculous streak on it since they stopped it being their permaban. So actually the only losses he has are against teams who actually at the moment it's among their best maps. So that really kind of highlights the bizarre nature, because essentially he's only losing on this map because he picks it or lets it be played directly into teams that arguably can beat him on it. It's kind of a paradox, right? Yeah, no, it's weird, yeah, because you see in a lot of these series, these big best-of-3 series that North has, I wonder if this isn't like, I wonder if North is not like as popular a team or as talked about a team, is because you see them in these like marquee series versus like someone like FaZe or SK or Astralis, and they just lose 2-0 immediately because North or MSL, or I don't know exactly who does that pick and ban phase. I always assume it's MSL, but they just pick Mirage, or it's always, ever since the player break, I was really surprised. I like wrote the sentence out and then I had to, double check to make sure it was true, but it must be. It almost certainly must be. There's only those 2 maps, right? Yeah, it's Cobblestone and Mirage every single first pick they've had since the player break, which is so insane to me that, because they had this, they were known for having a wide map pool, but they didn't have like such a good depth on it, to use your terms, where they could beat the best teams in the world on it. So you think they would abuse this, right? But they just pick whatever MSL thinks their best map is, which is Mirage for some reason. And I think it's like almost even more inexcusable that he thinks that he can like pick it versus these Mirage teams, that he can pick it versus SK and FaZe. Like, okay, if he loses to Astralis on it, I mean, that's more in the middle of the pool, right, for Astralis. Astralis is more like overpassing train right now. So, yeah, that's the one thing I had to sort of, in that, I think, penultimate paragraph, I sort of had to, like,
structure that last sentence in a way that didn't go too hard on MSL. But yeah, that is a huge it's a huge flaw. It's definitely, I think, the thing that's most inexcusable about him.
I mean, it's just the most obvious one where, like, I realize, like, you have to add a little bit of a caveat. Like, yeah, maybe it wouldn't work. Maybe he knows something we don't about the comfort of his team or whatever. But just from watching their games and watching them play on all these different maps, it just feels like at the very minimum, it would give you the slight edge, or it would even up some of the edge in some of these series where, you know, you win an extra map or you get to a third map, or you know what, and against some of these teams, maybe you get that map as the third map because both teams do like it, you know. That's the most bizarre part about it. That's one of those areas where I guess I'd have to do a separate interview just on this topic, because I'd really like to wonder, because what a lot of teams actually will do is sometimes they will do their kind of weird pick or for their map pick if they know logically, like, this team's not going to pick a bizarre third map as the decider, or, you know, we're both going to veto these two and it'll always end up on it anyway. It almost seems like he doesn't go into it with that mentality.
Yeah, and what was really interesting to me is that I thought in that Reflections interview, you did ask this question, like, why don't you pick more to the team's weaknesses, that your opponent's weaknesses? And his response was like, oh, I do that. That's definitely my strategy, which was like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, that's clearly not his strategy. So it's very bizarre to me. And I didn't include this in the piece, but I thought about talking about it. But, you know, it sort of goes into like psychology. I don't know the guy, right? But to me, it seems like MSL doesn't have a good understanding of like himself or his teams. Like, when he talks about himself as a player, when he talks about how he thinks how strong his team is, North is, it doesn't seem like it lines up with like a reasonable expectation. Like, I don't know, like, and you see him do all the complaints on Twitter and stuff. And I saw the interview he did with Sam recently, where he said, like, oh, he almost implied that FaZe game they would have won if it wasn't for the technical difficulties at E-League and he couldn't pause, which, okay, I mean, he had a good CT side versus them, but I don't think they were in position to win that series. I think they pretty much hit, like, I think they hit a pretty decent level. They were unfortunate with that thing, but he seemed like to way overestimate his chances. Like, he might have some sort of thing where he just has a confirmation bias. He sees them doing well in practice and thinks, okay, that's our level, but then everything else he doesn't factor it in or something.
Yeah, and the thing is, by the way, funnily enough, that is actually one of the reasons why, as well as the similarity in the pattern in the pick ban, as to why I actually contrasted him with Exist. It's not, by the way, in any sense how they are as in-game leaders. Like, obviously, Exist is like an alright in-game leader, but he's more of like the fragging, like loose style. MSL very different generally, you know, and especially in terms of his strengths. But in terms of their mentality, I can also tell you, if you talk to them privately, they are both like that. Like, what will happen is they're the ones who, if you like, because here's the thing, when you talk to someone privately, right? I've never been one of those people where, like, you're just a sycophant, you know, and you're like, oh, but you're so good, and you only mention the good things. You know, I try to do it like, right, let's talk shop, you know, like, oh, what do you think of this, or what do you think of this team that's coming up, you know, and you try and just gauge like what they think. But the notion is maybe you think to yourself, if this was a persona or an act, oftentimes people will drop it a little bit privately and be like, well, actually, you know, we're not doing that well on practice on that and stuff. And you'll often get a lot of like the cool little tidbits every now and then when you have these conversations. But if you talk to Exist and you talk to MSL, what you find is in every area where, even if you are actually like very polite about how you phrase it, sort of like, well, you know, there's a slight weakness here, or, you know, this other opponent might be better than you in this respect, that's where they just don't see eye to eye at all. They'll just be like, well, no, actually, I mean, I don't care what our record is on this map, you know, that's one of our best maps, and it's going to be one of our best maps, and actually, you know what, we should have won this game that we lost. And they do really have that mentality. And so the reason why it's bizarre in MSL's case is because, I mean, my conclusion, again, I don't claim to know him on some deep level. Again, this is just from talking to him, from watching him, and trying to observe like the psychology and reverse engineer it from the pick ban. I think he genuinely does think when he plays like FaZe or SK or Mirage, we're going to beat them on Mirage. My tactics are better, and then we're going to do the right things on the CT side, and we're going to win this game. I don't think he goes in like, here's the problem. I think because a lot of fans don't rate North that highly. Like, if you notice, okay, North's actually the other team along with Astralis, where I think fans will always be a little bit too down on them. Like, when Astralis was winning, okay, people could kind of begrudgingly admit they were the best, but you'll even see comments now where people are like Like, I did my counterpoints thing that I released, and people are like, why are they still listing Astralis as an elite team? It's like, well, listen, mate, I mean, I'd almost have to explain my entire philosophy on Counter-Strike to explain that. You know, it's kind of a consensus among all the top analysts. Likewise for North. Sure, most people don't have them like they're going to win the tournament, but almost everyone's like, you know, they're a dangerous team. They match up well against a lot of people. They should be like a playoff team, as you said in this article. They nearly always are a playoff team. But because they don't win, a lot of fans think to themselves, it is like a bottom top 10 team, you know, oh, who thinks North's good, you know? And as you're saying, if you look at the raw numbers, yeah, they're going to be losing a lot of Series 2-0, and they're not going to actually necessarily threaten to win the game. They'll just get 12 rounds or something, you know, and take the moral victory or whatever it is. But I actually do think that he thinks that when he plays these teams, he's the favourite, or that he should be, you know, that they should be better than they are.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was getting to at the very end of the piece, where I sort of compared him to like some fictional characters like Count of Monte Cristo or a Great Gatsby or something like this, or Ahab, Captain Ahab. It's like not good, you know. They're very these people, these fictional characters have these very, very clear flaws. Like I think there's even a line in The Great Gatsby where Nick Carraway says to Gatsby, you can't change the past, and he responds, what do you mean? Of course you can. Like, they have this inability to see like the world the way other people see it. It's like a monomaniac is how Captain Ahab's often described. And it seems like there's like that little bit of that in MSL, that no matter what the rest of the world thinks, or what, you know, everyone's telling him something and these past results aren't good, that he still believes it. And that's like, in a weird way, it's like not good, you know. You have to criticize him for it, yes. But it's almost in a weird way like admirable that he can still think like, well, I'm just gonna do it anyway, and we're gonna win this time, and he's completely sure of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, here's the funny thing about that. This is one of the areas where, again, also he massively differs and diverts path from Exist, is that when I'm critical of Exist, I generally am just fairly critical. I don't think he's that good. I think he's been pretty overrated, you know. But with MSL, what's bizarre is he's one of those people where actually I think I criticize him more because his good qualities are so good that I feel like if he just kind of trimmed the fat a bit, if he just kind of plugged a few weaknesses, I actually think he could blaze past some of these people that right now have better reps than him and have the more titles. And admittedly, some of them have better teams, but even so, I think he could really bridge that gap in some senses. And there's even a degree to which the problem, right, okay, when I unpack this concept here, there is a problem with it when you apply it to MSL. And the concept is this, right? There is something, I made a very short video about this. It's an abstract concept. There's something very compelling about someone who actually is like, oh, this is your strength, right? Well, I'm not going to like dodge that and go to something like, you know, more random or chaotic or like a weakness for both of us. I think that's my strength as well. So you know what? I actually think I'm better than you, and I'll go head to head with you on your strength, and I think I can win. There's something really compelling about that. The problem is, and this is the caveat, is that when the guy actually does it and then he wins and he's the champion, then you actually can give him like even more praise than if he'd have been like very shrewd and he'd done like cynical moves, you know. If you actually can just be like, you know, bear out your philosophy and do it. So actually there was an example recently. I don't follow fighting games very much, but I'm sure everyone who knows even a cursory amount knows this player called Daigo Umehara or whatever he's called from Japan, who's this like legendary Street Fighter player. And he had this quote, which I believe is not actually a direct quote from him. I think what it is someone took like comments he said in interviews, and then they made this manga about him, which has just come out. I've ordered it because Stu told me it's good. And within it, right, they have this line that's an amazing line. It goes along the lines of like, he says that like he doesn't want to beat people at their weaknesses. He wants to like beat them at their strengths, because that's like true victory. That's like true competition, basically. And to him, he's not thinking about the result. He's just trying to like be the best. And so to be the best, in a way, that's the ultimate way to prove you're the best, is to take someone on their strength and beat them at it. I mean, how can they really talk shit at that point in time? There's no excuses, right? So there is kind of something admirable in sort of a perverse way, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, that definitely came through at the end of my piece, that I thought in a weird way that it was very admirable, very like cool that he would try to beat FaZe on Mirage, beat SK on Mirage. But the same way I sometimes I think about this, and I was thinking about this earlier today in preparation for this video, but I don't know if MSL thinks about it like this, like that he thinks like, well, I'll just crush him on his own strength, or well, they're very good at Mirage, but I'll prove that I'm better. I don't think if he even thinks that, like, well, this is their strength and this is my strength and my strength is stronger. I just think he thinks, well, this is my strength, so why should I care about anyone else? I don't, of course, know what he's thinking, but it doesn't seem like it's like a ego trip for him, or maybe I don't know, but like it does almost seem like an invention by people watching, like oh, it's so cool that he's trying to crush people like this.
Okay. Right, here is the $1 million question, right? And obviously, no one knows the answer. It's pure speculation, hypothesis, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think, in a world where I set this premise up in one of my snipe videos not so long ago, where I make the point that, because in theory, yes, he does now have the backing and the foundation where, unless the player really wants to leave, he no longer ever has to lose a player. Like, you know, some of those players in the past, I could tell you, people like Kirby, etc., there's a part of them wanted to stay. But the problem is, at the time, you know, the salary jump up was more, it's a better team, it's with better players, it's clearly a better chance to win, and you never know, for example, if you don't take the offer, if the other star player in the team or the other good player gets it, and then you're like, fuck, you know, I kind of, damned if I do, damned if I don't. So, in the past, that was the case. Now, it's not so much. Like, yes, if Config wants to leave, probably eventually he can find a way out. But if Config wants to stay, and if MSL can make the team good enough, there is a world in which that whole thing of like getting your players sapped away shouldn't exist anymore. So in that world, like, first of all, we can't unfortunately then just give him the credit of like, you're the plucky up and comer now, you just got to be good in your own right. So the question is, do you think either he ever keeps going this path and breaks through and is winning titles, or he ever does make some sort of adjustment? It doesn't have to be what we're saying. You know, there's many ways to approach these things. You know, maybe he figures out a special time when you can do a different pick ban, but not always go with that approach. You know, maybe you can find some sort of middle ground. Do you think he ever does either of those two and we get a different MSL? Because at the moment, and this is something you kind of outlined here, like, it's certainly the case that people underrate how good North is. Like, they nearly are almost playoff team. And if you actually look even in this year, they've had some pretty solid results when they've been at their best, you know? But it is true that at the moment, you don't really look at them and think this is going to be a top 3 team for a 6-month span, pretty much at any point in time, you know. So does he ever break through? Does he ever go to the next level, do you think?
That's a rough question. I'm usually really bad at predictions, but I don't know. This is a status, like the status of the North organization is something that he just recently received. And I think Valde was a good pickup, but I mean, results have pretty much stayed pretty much the same since he picked up, North picked up Valde.
Sure.
I think.
I mean, hey, that's actually one thing I could ask you about. Okay, it's because obviously, like, you can keep working through that other one, but here's something that I not only does he make stars, but fucking hell, this guy's good at recruiting players, right? It seems like here's the thing. Yes, people did say things within the Danish scene a long time ago, like Config could be a star one day. But even when he'd been in some teams, like he was in SK, and then obviously he was originally in Dignitas early on, he wasn't playing like a star player, you know? He had like the odd brief flash. But even when he does the moves that are almost like the sideway move, like when he removes Magus but keeps AZ and then puts Valde in, you're sort of thinking like, okay, is that just like a sideway trade? Like, you know, but they do seem to work out, right?
Yeah, no, I think Rubino to AZ and Magix to Valde were all sort of sideways trades, but in its own way they did work, and North is continued.
I mean, none of them seem to fail, put it that way, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't, like, it's not, I think he has like the effectiveness of the T sides rather, I think is always going to give him enough rounds, enough leeway to still do well to make playoffs. It's just, I think there's all these other flaws. The pick and ban phase, the pick and ban phase, I think comes into the playoffs more than the group stage, obviously, because that's the best of 3. But versus the best of 1, which is like, you know, you can't just pick Mirage, right?
Which is kind of ironic if you think about it, right? Because actually, as you said, he makes the majority of the playoffs. So in the best of 1 type scenario where you have no choice but to sort of meet in the middle and he has a wide map pool, you would almost think he'd pick up on that hint eventually. Like, when they force me to play these other maps, we do seem to get the wins always to get in the playoffs. And then I pick the map I want, you know, like, but again, some people are just bizarre like that, you know?
He's an enigmatic. He's a questionable figure. Like, it doesn't. quite make sense. Like if you just think like, okay, if he just picked his picks and ban phase, it'd just be, I think they'd win playoff series. I think they could get top fours way more regularly, but it just doesn't happen. It's just like this continuous trend. And you think, I mean, going back to your question, if he's going to succeed or not, it just seems so tied to his weaknesses that he just has this understanding that's apart from everyone else that prevents him from ever changing, or prevents him. It gives him his strengths. You know, he has his own. You know, he has his own T sides that are different, and he understands he has his own understanding of players and pickups and how he wants to structure the team in his own way. But at the same time, doing things his own way leads him to having all these flaws as well.
Sure. Okay, so at the end, actually, I'll wrap up by just saying I purposely picked one part of the article, which actually we won't delve into, because first of all, you kind of elucidated it entirely in the article, and there's not that much to actually talk around with. It would just be kind of me repeating or saying what I agreed with. And also, I think this will be quite an intriguing aspect to maybe draw people in to read the piece, which is I thought you did a really interesting job of framing how, when you see his stats and the fact that he clearly is not even vaguely a high fragging in-game leader, there's actually some very good conditions as to why that is, but that don't make that a negative. Because even though, like, in terms of skills, like, clearly he's not a top player or anything, he's got very rudimentary skills, that you actually I thought you framed it in a very interesting way where people might actually think of it differently, not just as they do with a lot of these players, like, oh, it's a brain in a bot, basically, which is how people kind of, you know, derogatorily do it, or do it for banter. So we'll end on that note.
Hi, this is Natu, a guy who's way too old and way too long involved in this game, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.